Welcome back. So let's go back to one of our top stories where various groups are told Parliament's Joint Standing and Select Committee on Finances that a proposed 0.5% increase in VAT should either be frozen or scrapped. It follows Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's budget earlier this month where he said there's a need for more revenue to be collected to fund government's priorities. Cosatu Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks joins us now for more. Matthew, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. A busy day for Cosatu and certainly other bodies that were before the Joint Finance Committee meeting. But why it was important for Cosatu to make representations, and for the sake of our viewers tuning in now, what those representations are, where that also contentious 0.5% VAT increase is concerned.
Good evening. Thanks for having us. So for us as Cosatu, Parliament is a critical site of contestation. It's a chance for us to raise the views, the concerns, the frustrations, and also, most critically, the proposals of workers with regards to the budget, to laws, etc. I think we all know about the difficulties around the budget process, and obviously the government cannot run without a budget. There's a strict time frame that Parliament needs to pass the budget quite soon. Yes, there is a little bit of flexibility on a particular time frame. You could have a few weeks, even a month or so, but you're in a dangerous territory if Parliament doesn't soon pass the budget. And of course, we need government to have a budget so they can pay social grants, they can invest in the economy, they can fund public services, pay nurses' salaries, and so forth. I think the thrust of our submission to Parliament today is that there are good things in the budget that we have fought for, that are there and that we want to defend and make sure that they carry through. So, for example, increasing social grants by double inflation, extending the basket of goods exempt from VAT, a freeze on the fuel price hike. Those give some relief to the poor, expanding public employment programs to help young people find work, the significant investment in infrastructure, especially around electricity and roads and water, hospitals, 4 new hospitals, 13,000 university beds. So those are things we've been fighting for. There's some additional investments to support SMEs and industrialization as well. We have been campaigning as Cosatu quite vociferously to give SARS an additional 7.5 billion rand. Treasury has agreed to that. So that's going to really help to enable SARS to go after money which is owed to the states, existing taxes. So there's quite a variety of things which are quite useful. There's a public service wage agreement which is going to help protect teachers and nurses and police officers from inflation. There's a filling of critical frontline vacancy posts like 1,800 doctors, 4,000 police officers, positions for nurses and so forth, and teachers. There's a rebuilding of frontline public service departments like home affairs, education, health, police, defense, corrections. So those are good things. I think where we diverge from Treasury is that we don't think we need to fund those through a VAT hike. And yes, we're glad that we managed to reduce the VAT hike through our and other organizations' objections to the 2% VAT hike. Treasury's now come with a 0.5% hike for this year, and they'll see if that is necessary to continue next year, or if revenue improves, etc. But I think for us, we think there are other better options. Number one is giving SARS resources to go after tax evasion. Number two, we think you could help make sure the wealthy individuals, wealthy corporations pay their fair share, look at reducing some of the loopholes that they exploit. And of course, you know, the VAT hike generates about 14.5 billion rand in a budget of 2.4 trillion rand. We think that surely with a little bit of work, one could find that 14 billion rand in that existing budget without undermining public services. We also don't support not adjusting personal income tax brackets for inflation, especially for lower and middle income workers who are really struggling with the cost of living, who are highly indebted. So I think in a nutshell, there are good things around the expenditure front. There are parts which we're not happy with, for example, not adjusting the SOD grant for inflation. I think our major diversion is that using the VAT and personal income tax brackets as a way to generate the revenue. I think there are better ways, but ultimately Parliament now needs to look at, do they agree with the budget as is, or do they accept our proposal to make those few simple but critical progressive tweaks? But we do need ultimately to see a budget being passed. We hope that the final product will be a progressive one that really focuses on rebuilding the state, which it does have elements of stimulating the economy, which has got significant elements of giving relief to the poor, which it does provide, and of course we hope a more progressive tax regime. as opposed to the proposals of a VAT hike.
So from what I hear, Matthew, obviously a lot of satisfaction from Cosatu's point of view where expenditure is concerned, and you've just said that as well, but concerned about where that money is going to come from. There are other ways that you think that money can be raised. Perhaps you can speak to me about what your concerns are about what that 0.5% increase in 2025 would do to the working class. I mean, there is a debate around whether or not expanding on zero-rated VAT goods actually provides some sort of reprieve for the working class.
Yeah. So look, I mean, let me say the easy part, the expanding the basket of goods who are exempt from VAT to include other meat, vegetable and dairy products, that's good. The challenges, that's a good thing, something we've been calling for a long time, so that's a positive thing. The difficulty there is to make sure that retailers actually transfer the savings there to the consumers, that they don't just pocket the difference. That's the one difficult part. But nonetheless, it is a good progressive objective. We need to make sure find ways to ensure it's enforced. But the issue with the VAT hike is that it treats people who are working class, who earn very little, maybe even don't even qualify to pay income tax and so little. You treat them the same as you treat a millionaire. And I think for us, the tax regime must always be progressive to make sure those who earn the least pay the least, and make sure those who earn the most pay the most. But if VAT treats everybody the same, and workers are drowning in debt, the salaries don't always keep pace with inflation. The goods that workers spend most of the money on, about 60% of the salary of an average worker goes towards transport and electricity. Workers are highly indebted because the wages don't keep pace with inflation. We've seen significant rise in the cost of living. So ESCOM tariff prices, went up, 600% in the last 2 decades. They go up every year by double digits. Yet inflation is nowhere ever close to that. The fuel price has gone up significantly, making transport much more expensive, which also has made food and other essential items more expensive. So workers are struggling, they're drowning in debt, they're supporting on average 7 relatives. So they literally just don't have a cent to spare. And of course, society is correctly frustrated and fed up after, the former President Jacob Zuma's era of state capture and so forth, where we saw a lot of money being lost to the state, to corruption and so forth. There is still a lot of wastage in the system. And we are convinced that you can find 14.5 billion rand within the fiscus. You can reduce what you spend on politicians, what you spend on catering, on travel, on advertising, and so forth. And we think there are alternative ways to also find additional revenue. We've made a proposal, for example, that government spending correctly saw a huge amount of money, about R1 trillion over 3 years on economic infrastructure. That's excellent. That's going to grow the economy, create jobs. But we think that you could engage the Development Bank, the Industrial Development Corporation, the Public Investment Corporation, to take over some of those economic infrastructure projects, to own them, to return, get a return on investment for it. But in that way, you can take some of those things like the 13,000 university beds, like some of the roads or electricity or port or rail investments, because there's always a charge for users for those products. But you could reduce the expenditure pressure on the state. And similarly around public employment programs, that you need to engage the SETAs who have a lot of money, which is often wasted, the National Skills Fund, and again, the other DFIs, the Public Investment Corporation, to say that surely you can contribute towards some of these public employment programs, assist the state when it's really struggling, and see how do we free up money in a more progressive way.
Yeah. But
I think our proposal to Treasury Department is say, let's help you find solutions, and let's avoid solutions which hurt the workers.
Yeah, so those are the contributions put forward by Cosatu. Of course, Parliament having until the 3rd of April to ensure that this fiscal framework, I suppose, is approved. Are you confident that that deadline will be met peacefully? And I mean, the concerns that you may have around actually getting to meet that deadline, especially when you start looking at other political parties in this government of national unity, the position they may take around a VAT increase and some of the stumbling blocks that they may have for the financial year ahead of us.
Look, ultimately something will have to be done, or we can't afford for the state to go into collapse. And that's why we've been a bit concerned by political parties inside government, outside government, are not finding solutions. Society cannot afford for government to collapse like you find in the United States when their Congress doesn't pass budgets at the time. We can't afford that. We don't have the luxury to do that. And we should not expose people who receive social grants. We should not expose nurses and police officers to that kind of peril. But we are confident that something will be achieved. I think our only concern is that let it be a progressive solution, and we don't think it's that complicated to find it, but it requires a certain amount of sobriety and maturity amongst parliamentarians. the opposition parties also need to be a little bit mature and assist government in its moment of need. And of course, government treasury also needs to be a little bit humble and not always be inflexible. They need to be willing to find solutions. And when solutions make sense, to find compromise. We're convinced we can do so. We have made good progress. The first budget proposal of a 2% hike, that was unacceptable. And so it is positive that government showed political maturity and humility and retreated from that stance and came with additional measures. But we also want to be fair to the Minister of Finance that we've been raising for years as Cosatu the need to rebuild public services, to protect the poor, to build infrastructure, to stimulate the economy. He has responded to those calls. Not everything is fine, but he has signaled a shift that they want to move away from austerity budget cuts. So I think for us that's critical, is really finding a progressive revenue solution. And we don't think that can be that difficult. It just requires a little bit of political will. But look, it needs to be done soon. We can't afford to enter unconstitutional territory, and that's also why we would not support a legal challenge to how Parliament passes legislation, especially on budgets, because that's playing Russian roulette, where we need to make sure that nurses get paid when social grant recipients, old age pensioners receive the monies on time.
Yeah. Matthew Parks, thank you so much for speaking to us. We really do appreciate it. Matthew Parks is, of course, the Parliamentary Coordinator for Cosatu, sharing with us the contributions that Cosatu made before the Joint Finance Committee meeting taking place today.